I started feeling the positive effects of my antidepressant quite quickly in the weeks after my meeting with Dr. Said. My anxious thoughts faded away, and I found myself in a more positive mood again. Rather than working out on the machines in the gym where we had signed up, I had decided to do some regular swimming in the gym's pool. Gerhard looked after Elliot while I was doing this exercise, which was so good for me. It was often just me in the swimming pool, and I would set myself challenges by counting the number of lengths I completed. Physical exercise combined with my medication was having a very positive effect on my mental health. Although I was feeling in better form and finding some mental stability again, I still thought that the role of a mother was a demanding one. I couldn't wait for Elliot to get older so I could do more varied activity with him. I was also desperate for more time to myself. I often ended up putting him down on the floor with some toys and letting him play by himself for a little while. I would then sit down with my computer next to him and go on the internet. I felt guilty for not wanting to interact with him more, but I needed a break until he demanded my attention again. I was eager to read everything I could find about postpartum mood disorders, and especially about postpartum bipolar disorder. Although I discovered lots of varied information and people's accounts in English, none of them related to the diagnosis which I had received. It seemed like my condition was not addressed or even recognized. I had confidence in Dr. Said and his diagnosis, but I was really intrigued that I couldn't find it anywhere in the accounts I was reading. I felt excluded in my postpartum reality. But this feeling of isolation did not stop me from speaking openly about my experience. I told myself that the more people spoke without shame about postpartum mood disorders, the more chance there would be of reducing the stigma surrounding them. Weeks passed, and I was thankful that the antidepressant was effective. Yet, I had noticed that although my depression had faded away, my libido had not returned to normal. Also, I could no longer reach orgasm. I spoke about this situation to Dr. Said during my next follow-up visit. It turned out that these were secondary effects of citalopram. He suggested I try Wellbutrin, another antidepressant which could be effective for me. This change of medication worked well. I regained a more normal sex life. Dr. Said prescribed me this antidepressant for a year, after which he would gradually reduce my dose until I did not need it anymore. The only other medication that I would continue taking would be olanzapine. Its dose had also reduced over time, and I was only taking 5 milligrams each day. We did not know how long I would need it, but Dr. Said would continue seeing me on a regular basis, roughly every 2 months, to monitor my condition. 9 months had passed since my son had been born. He was getting older quickly, and the arrival of summer allowed us to do more activities outside with him. The struggles of the postpartum period were finally behind me, and I could glimpse a positive future. My year of maternity leave was coming to an end, but there was no employment waiting for me. During my pregnancy, I had got a contract with a French-speaking school board just a few months after moving to Ontario. Yet, this contract had not been renewed, and I was anticipating doing some supply teaching once my maternity leave was over. To my surprise, in June, I received a call from my former boss who told me there was a permanent position as an education consultant opening up, to which she encouraged me to apply. It was a good opportunity for me, and so I did not hesitate. I was invited for an interview a few days later. Although I was nervous, it went very well. I was offered the position, and I was very glad to accept it. I felt ready to take on this new challenge, and since I already knew some people at my future workplace, I knew that I would be well supported and that the transition would be easier. Towards the end of the summer, Elliot gradually started going to a home daycare. He did not adjust to it very easily. I also had difficulty getting used to not being with him for the whole day. But we both adapted to the new routine. I was glad to have more of a social life again through work. Right from the beginning of my job, I made a decision to be open with my new boss about my mental health. I preferred to be completely honest with him, in case I ever needed to take some time off to look after myself psychologically. He was very understanding. I also felt at ease talking with my colleagues about it, and they all treated me with respect. I never regretted that decision. My openness about my difficulties even encouraged certain others among them to confide in me about the subject of mental health. I was all the more aware of how much work there was still to be done to destroy the stigma attached to mental illness. The learning curve at work proved to be rather steep. To ease my integration into the new position, my director took care in the first few months not to overload my timetable with demanding tasks. I had the time to do some reading for my job and work with colleagues to familiarize myself with my new roles. There was so much to learn. I was experiencing some stress, but managing to keep it under control. Gradually, my tasks got bigger, and so I started experiencing some occasional anxiety. This manifested itself as a feeling of losing control, as if time was freezing in my head and things were happening around me without me being able to keep my brain fully engaged with them. I felt incompetent and powerless, but nobody could tell something was wrong. I spoke about it with Dr. Said, and I learned that anxiety is a fairly common problem for those who live with a bipolar disorder. He recommended I take an extra pill of olanzapine when I experienced an episode of anxiety. I put a few pills in my bag so that I could always have one available. Although I didn't want to be dependent on a pill to calm down each time I was anxious, I used this method on a few occasions and it proved effective. I also learned from experience that intense exercise, such as running, helped to reduce my anxiety. Getting enough sleep and avoiding caffeine also turned out to be effective ways of preventing anxiety attacks. In January 2012, after a suggestion from work colleagues and with my husband's help, I started a blog. I had already started to write the story of my postpartum experience, and the idea was to share the chapters I was writing about it, as well as information posts about postpartum mood disorders and my daily life. My blog was very well received by my friends and family, which encouraged me to continue gradually writing my story. 2 years passed after my period of depression without a relapse. I continued seeing Dr. Said every 2 or 3 months. Then one day, he suggested I stop taking the medication completely. I was now on only a minimal dose of olanzapine, 2.5 milligrams, and since my condition was stable, he thought I could try to come off it. I was a little nervous at this idea, but I said yes. He advised me to attempt it during my summer holidays, when there would not be any stress from work. I followed his advice and stopped taking the medicine at the beginning of my holidays. The first week passed without me noticing any difference to my mental state. Yet, in the second week, during a week-long stay with all my family in a summer cottage, I started experiencing some unfamiliar symptoms. I had lots of difficulty relaxing. I was preoccupied by unimportant details, and I sometimes had nausea which completely killed my appetite. My constant worries were preventing me from enjoying our time all together as a family. I didn't immediately make the connection between these symptoms of anxiety and the fact I had stopped my medication. When we were back from the summer house, I spent lots of time packing up boxes to prepare for our move into a house which was planned for the end of July. Although I was confident I would have enough time to prepare for the move, this positive feeling rapidly faded when I stopped sleeping well at night and started being unproductive during the day. Elliot's normal babysitter had taken a month off, and a new babysitter was looking after him. I would have liked to have kept Elliot at home, but I knew that it would not be possible to get ready for the move as quickly if I was keeping him entertained too. This change of routine was difficult for him, which made me feel guilty. He started waking up during the night and needed me to be there to fall back asleep. I had difficulty getting back to sleep each time he woke me up. Since I was feeling more tired during the day, I tried having naps to catch up on sleep, but without success. This made my anxiety more intense. I was now aware that it had probably got worse because I was not taking the medicine anymore. But I refused to deal with the problem by taking the pills again. I wanted to see if I was going to do without them. A few days before the move, my mother came to visit to give us a hand. I had not filled as many boxes as planned, and her assistance was really helpful. Nevertheless, my anxiety persisted stubbornly, and in the end, she succeeded in convincing me to take one of my pills to see if it would make any difference. The effect was immediate, and I rediscovered a state of calm which I had not felt for weeks. I knew then that I could not do without my medication yet. At the next meeting with Dr. Said, therefore, I described my bad experience of coming off the medication. He concluded from this that although my dose was minimal, my brain still needed it to function properly, and that this would probably be the case for the rest of my life. I did not have a problem with that. I had already accepted my condition, and I felt no shame in continuing to take a medicine which would keep me mentally stable.